Some moments in life arrive without warning, shattering everything you thought you knew about your world. For hotel owner Marcus Chun, that moment came on a rainy Tuesday evening when a young woman with familiar eyes walked through his lobby doors. What she said next would unravel 20 years of carefully buried secrets and force him to confront the biggest mistake of his life. This is the true story of a father who lost everything trying to build an empire, and a daughter who traveled halfway around the world to find the man who abandoned her. It's a tale of redemption, forgiveness, and the unbreakable bonds that connect us even when we try our hardest to sever them. What happened in that hotel lobby would not only change two lives forever, but would also teach everyone who witnessed it that sometimes the most powerful word in any language is simply "Dad." Marcus Chun stood behind the polished marble reception desk of the Grand Harbor Hotel, his eyes scanning the bustling lobby with the practiced gaze of a man who had built an empire from nothing. At 52, he commanded respect in the hospitality industry. His chain of 12 luxury hotels across 3 countries generated millions in revenue annually. The business magazines called him a visionary, the immigrant success story that inspired thousands. But success had come at a price Marcus rarely allowed himself to think about. The Grand Harbor was his crown jewel, a 40-story monument to his ambition located in the heart of downtown Seattle. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across imported Italian marble floors, and the sound of a grand piano drifted from the adjacent restaurant where celebrities and business moguls dined on cuisine prepared by award-winning chefs. Marcus had personally overseen every detail during construction, from the thread count of the Egyptian cotton sheets to the specific shade of gold used in the bathroom fixtures. Tonight, like every night for the past 15 years, Marcus walked the lobby floor. It was his ritual, his way of ensuring everything met his impossibly high standards. He nodded to the doorman, adjusted a slightly crooked painting, and observed the seamless choreography of his well-trained staff. The hotel operated like a Swiss watch, precise and reliable. "Good evening, Mr. Chun," called out Patricia, the night manager, her voice carrying the professional warmth that had earned her recognition as Employee of the Year 3 times running. "The presidential suite guests are requesting additional towels, and the conference room setup for tomorrow's tech summit is complete." Marcus acknowledged her with a brief nod, his mind already moving to the next item on his mental checklist. This attention to detail, this relentless pursuit of perfection, had lifted him from the son of poor immigrants who ran a tiny laundromat in Portland to the owner of a hospitality empire that bore his name. The journey had not been easy. Marcus remembered working 16-hour days alongside his parents, the smell of industrial detergent permanently embedded in his clothes, the ache in his back from hauling heavy bags of laundry. His parents, David and Lily Chun, had sacrificed everything to give their son opportunities they never had. They worked until their hands were raw and their bodies broken, saving every penny they could for Marcus's education. When Marcus received a full scholarship to study business at the University of Washington, his parents wept with joy. They saw their son's potential and pushed him to reach higher, to build something greater than they ever could. Marcus absorbed their lessons about hard work and sacrifice, but somewhere along the way, he also learned to see emotional attachments as obstacles to success. The first hotel Marcus purchased was a rundown motel on the outskirts of Portland. He was 28, married to Sarah, a kind-hearted teacher he had met in college. Sarah supported his dreams, even when it meant eating ramen noodles for dinner and driving a car that barely started on cold mornings. She believed in Marcus's vision when banks laughed at his loan applications and competitors dismissed him as another dreamer who would fail within a year. Sarah was pregnant with their first child when Marcus took the biggest risk of his life. A prime piece of real estate had become available in downtown Portland, and Marcus knew it was his chance to build something special. The purchase would require every penny they had saved, plus loans that would bury them in debt for decades if the venture failed. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah had asked, her hand resting on her growing belly. "What if something goes wrong? What about the baby?" Marcus remembered the certainty in his own voice when he replied, "This is our future. Trust me." The hotel was a success, exceeding even Marcus's ambitious projections. Within 2 years, he had paid off the initial loans and was eyeing expansion opportunities. Sarah gave birth to a beautiful daughter they named Elena, a child with Sarah's gentle eyes and Marcus's determined spirit. For a brief moment, it seemed like Marcus had everything a man could want. But success was intoxicating, and Marcus found himself hungry for more. The hospitality industry was booming, and opportunities seemed to appear everywhere he looked. He began traveling constantly, scouting locations, meeting with investors, and building the network that would eventually support his growing empire. Sarah supported his ambitions at first, understanding that building a business required sacrifice. She managed their home and cared for Elena while Marcus spent weeks away pursuing deals. But as the months turned into years, the distance between them grew. Marcus was present in body when he was home, but his mind was always somewhere else, calculating revenue projections and planning his next acquisition. The breaking point came when Elena was 4 years old. Marcus had promised to attend her preschool graduation, a small ceremony that meant the world to their daughter. Sarah had bought Elena a new dress, and the little girl had practiced her song for weeks, eager to perform for her daddy. But on the morning of the ceremony, Marcus received a call about a time-sensitive deal in Vancouver that could net him enough profit to fund his next 2 hotel purchases. "I have to go," Marcus told Sarah, already reaching for his suitcase. "This opportunity won't wait." "Your daughter won't wait either," Sarah replied, her voice heavy with disappointment. "She's growing up without you, Marcus. We both are." Marcus convinced himself that missing one school event was a small price to pay for securing his family's financial future. He flew to Vancouver, closed the deal, and felt the familiar rush of victory. But when he returned home 3 days later, something had changed in Sarah's eyes. The warmth was gone, replaced by a resignation that frightened him more than any business setback ever could. The arguments began in earnest after that. Sarah pleaded with Marcus to slow down, to remember why he was working so hard in the first place. She reminded him of the dreams they had shared, the life they had planned to build together. But Marcus saw her concerns as weakness, as a lack of understanding about what it took to succeed in a competitive world. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," Marcus would say during their late-night arguments. "Everything I'm doing is for you and Elena. I'm building something that will last, something she can inherit." "She doesn't want your hotels," Sarah would reply, tears streaming down her face. "She wants her father." The final confrontation happened on a cold December evening. Marcus had just returned from a 2-week trip to Asia, where he had successfully negotiated the purchase of his 5th hotel. He was exhausted, but exhilarated, eager to share the details of his triumph with Sarah. Instead, he found her waiting in their living room with a suitcase at her feet and divorce papers on the coffee table. "I can't do this anymore," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the tears. "I've tried to be patient. I've tried to understand. But you never hear, Marcus. Even when you're physically present, you're thinking about business. Elena doesn't even run to the door when you come home anymore, because she's learned not to get her hopes up." Marcus felt his world tilting on its axis. "Sarah, please. Just give me a little more time. Once I establish the chain, things will be different. I'll delegate more. We can have the life we always wanted." "When?" Sarah asked. "When you have 10 hotels, 20? There will always be another deal, Marcus. Another opportunity that's too good to pass up. I've watched you choose business over family so many times that I've lost count." The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. Sarah asked for joint custody of Elena, but Marcus's travel schedule made shared parenting nearly impossible. The court awarded Sarah primary custody, with Marcus granted visitation rights every other weekend and holidays when his schedule permitted. Marcus threw himself into work with even greater intensity after the divorce, using business success as a shield against the pain of his personal failures. He told himself that providing financially for Elena was the most important thing he could do as a father. He set up a generous trust fund for her education and future, sent expensive gifts for birthdays and holidays, and made sure Sarah never had to worry about money. But as the years passed, Marcus's visits with Elena became increasingly strained. The little girl who had once squealed with delight when he walked through the door grew quiet and distant. She would answer his questions with single-word responses and spend their time together staring out the window or reading books. Marcus didn't know how to bridge the growing chasm between them, so he did what he had always done when faced with emotional complexity. He worked harder. When Elena turned 8, Sarah remarried a high school principal named Tom Morrison. Tom was everything Marcus wasn't: patient, present, and genuinely interested in the mundane details of a child's daily life. Marcus watched from the sidelines as another man taught his daughter to ride a bicycle, helped her with homework, and attended her school events. The sight of Elena calling Tom Dad in front of him was a knife to the heart that Marcus pretended not to feel. The visits became less frequent as Marcus expanded his business internationally. He told himself it was better this way. Elena seemed happier with her new family, and Marcus could focus on building the empire that would eventually benefit her. He convinced himself that his absence was actually a gift, allowing his daughter to have the stable home life he was apparently incapable of providing. By the time Elena turned 12, Marcus's visits had dwindled to brief encounters a few times a year. The conversations were awkward and formal, filled with uncomfortable silences that neither of them knew how to fill. Marcus would ask about school and her friends, and Elena would provide polite but minimal responses. He sensed her pulling away, but he didn't know how to stop it. The last time Marcus saw his daughter, she was 16 years old. He had flown to Portland specifically to take her to dinner for her birthday, but she seemed more interested in her phone than in anything he had to say. When he presented her with an expensive diamond necklace, she thanked him politely but without enthusiasm. As he drove her back to Sarah's house, Elena turned to him with an expression that was far too mature for her age. "You don't have to keep doing this," she said quietly. "I know you're busy, and honestly, these visits are weird for both of us. Maybe it would be better if we just stopped pretending." Marcus felt like she had reached into his chest and squeezed his heart until it stopped beating. But instead of fighting for their relationship, instead of admitting how much those words hurt, he simply nodded and said, "If that's what you want." Elena got out of the car without looking back, and Marcus drove away knowing he had just lost his daughter forever. He told himself it was for the best, that she would be happier without the obligation of maintaining a relationship with a father who had failed her so completely. In the years that followed, Marcus received updates about Elena through birthday cards and holiday photos that Sarah continued to send despite everything. He learned that Elena had excelled in school, earned a scholarship to study international relations at Columbia University, and later accepted a position with a humanitarian organization that worked in developing countries. Each update filled him with pride and regret in equal measure. Now, standing in his flagship hotel, Marcus pushed those memories back into the locked compartment of his mind, where he kept all his personal failures. He had built something magnificent, something that would outlast him and serve as a testament to his vision and determination. If the price had been his relationship with his daughter, well, successful men often had to make difficult choices. The lobby was finally quiet, the last of the evening guests having retired to their rooms. Marcus was about to head to his penthouse apartment on the top floor when he noticed a young woman standing near the entrance, seemingly uncertain about whether to come inside. She was soaked from the rain that had been falling steadily since sunset, her dark hair plastered to her head, and her clothes clinging to her small frame. Something about her posture struck Marcus as familiar, though he couldn't place why. She stood with her shoulders back despite her bedraggled appearance, displaying a quiet dignity that reminded him of someone he once knew. As she finally stepped into the lobby, Marcus found himself studying her face, noting the determined set of her jaw and the intelligent eyes that seemed to take in every detail of her surroundings. The young woman approached the reception desk, where Patricia was handling the night shift. Marcus was too far away to hear their conversation, but he could see the woman gesturing animatedly while Patricia typed on her computer. After a few minutes, Patricia picked up the phone and made a brief call, her expression growing more serious with each passing second. Marcus felt an inexplicable pull to intervene, though he couldn't articulate why. This was exactly the kind of situation his staff was trained to handle without his involvement. Yet something about the young woman's presence in his lobby filled him with an unease he couldn't shake. As he watched, Patricia ended her phone call and spoke quietly to the woman, who nodded and took a seat in one of the leather chairs near the fireplace. The woman sat perfectly straight, her hands folded in her lap, waiting with the kind of patience that spoke of years of practice. There was something regal about her bearing, even in her damp clothes and obvious exhaustion. Marcus made a decision that surprised even him. Instead of heading to his private elevator, he walked toward the reception desk, his curiosity overriding his usual policy of letting his staff handle guest relations. "Is there a problem?" he asked Patricia, though his eyes remained on the young woman by the fireplace. "Nothing we can't handle, Mr. Chun," Patricia replied diplomatically. "The young lady is asking about a guest, but she doesn't have a room number or reservation confirmation. She says it's urgent, but you know our privacy policies." Marcus nodded, appreciating his staff's adherence to protocol. The Grand Harbor had hosted everyone from foreign dignitaries to Hollywood stars, and maintaining guest confidentiality was paramount to their reputation. But something about this particular situation felt different. "What did she say exactly?" Marcus asked, still unable to shake the feeling that he was missing something important. Patricia glanced at the young woman, then back at Marcus. "She says she's looking for her father. She seems to think he might be staying here, but she doesn't have any concrete information. I offered to call the police or help her contact other family members, but she insists this is where she needs to be." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. A young woman, looking for her father, certain she would find him here. The coincidence seemed impossible, yet Marcus felt the stirrings of a fear he had been avoiding for 20 years. He looked at the woman again, this time studying her features more carefully. The shape of her eyes, the line of her jaw, the way she held her head. Suddenly, Marcus understood why she had seemed familiar. He was looking at features he recognized from his own mirror, combined with the gentle beauty that had once belonged to Sarah. This wasn't a coincidence or a strange twist of fate. This was his past, finally catching up with him in the most public possible way. "Sir," Patricia prompted, noticing that Marcus had gone pale. "Should I call security?" Marcus shook his head, his mouth suddenly dry. "No," he managed to say. "I'll handle this personally." As he walked toward the fireplace, Marcus felt like he was moving through a dream. Each step brought him closer to a reckoning he had been avoiding for decades. The young woman looked up as he approached, and when their eyes met, Marcus saw a flash of recognition that confirmed his worst fears and deepest hopes. She stood gracefully, her composure never wavering despite the magnitude of the moment. For several seconds, they simply looked at each other, two strangers who shared blood and a history of pain neither had known how to heal. Then, in a voice that carried across the quiet lobby with perfect clarity, the young woman spoke the word that would change everything. "Dad." The single word hung in the air between them like a bridge across 20 years of silence. Marcus felt his legs go weak, and he had to grip the back of a nearby chair to steady himself. The young woman before him was unmistakably Elena, though she bore little resemblance to the awkward 16-year-old he had last seen 6 years ago. At 22, she had grown into a beautiful, confident woman whose eyes held depths of experience that seemed impossible for someone so young. "Elena," Marcus whispered, the name feeling foreign on his lips after so many years of not speaking it aloud. "What are you doing here?" Elena's composure faltered for just a moment, and Marcus caught a glimpse of the little girl who used to wait by the window for his infrequent visits. But the vulnerability passed quickly, replaced by the steely determination that Marcus recognized as an echo of his own personality. "I came to find you," Elena said simply. "I've been looking for you for 3 months." The lobby around them seemed to fade away as Marcus struggled to process what was happening. His daughter, the child he had convinced himself was better off without him, had been searching for him. The implications of that fact were too overwhelming to fully comprehend. 3 months, Marcus repeated, his voice barely audible. But why? How did you even know I was here? Elena's smile was sad and knowing. You're not as invisible as you think you are, Dad. Your hotels are featured in business magazines. Your picture is on the company website. When someone wants to find Marcus Chun, the hotel mogul, it's not that difficult. Patricia and the night security guard had noticed the intensity of the conversation and were hovering nearby, unsure whether to intervene. Marcus became aware of their presence and realized that this profoundly personal moment was unfolding in the most public space possible. His first instinct was to protect his privacy, to move this conversation somewhere away from prying eyes and potential gossip. But something in Elena's steady gaze told him that running away was not an option this time. Would you like to sit down? Marcus asked, gesturing to the seating area near the fireplace. His hands were trembling slightly, and he hoped Elena wouldn't notice. Can I get you something warm to drink? You're soaking wet. Elena looked down at her damp clothes, as if noticing them for the first time. I've been walking in the rain for hours, she admitted. I knew this was your hotel, but I couldn't work up the courage to come inside. I must have circled the block a dozen times. The image of his daughter walking alone in the rain, summoning the courage to face a father who had abandoned her, was almost more than Marcus could bear. He signaled to Patricia, who immediately understood and dispatched a server to bring hot tea and towels. As they settled into the plush chairs near the fireplace, Marcus found himself studying Elena with the intensity of a man trying to memorize every detail. She had Sarah's delicate bone structure, but his dark eyes and determined chin. Her hair was longer than he remembered, falling in waves past her shoulders, and she wore simple clothes that spoke of practicality rather than fashion. There was an air of quiet strength about her that reminded Marcus of his own mother, who had faced countless hardships with grace and dignity. You said you've been looking for me for 3 months, Marcus said, accepting a cup of tea with hands that still weren't entirely steady. May I ask why now? It's been 6 years since we last spoke. Elena wrapped her fingers around her own cup, using the warmth to combat the chill from her rain-soaked clothes. Because I finally understood something that took me a long time to figure out, she said, her voice measured and thoughtful. I realized that all these years I've been carrying around anger and hurt that was eating me alive. I kept waiting for you to be the one to fix what was broken between us, but I finally accepted that wasn't going to happen. The words stung, but Marcus recognized the truth in them. He had always been a master at avoiding uncomfortable situations, and his relationship with Elena had been the most uncomfortable situation of all. So you decided to find me, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. I decided to try to understand you, Elena corrected. There's a difference. I spent 2 years in Cambodia working with refugees, people who had lost everything and everyone they loved. I saw families torn apart by war and poverty, parents who would have given anything for the chance to hold their children again. And I kept thinking about us, about how we had all the opportunities in the world to have a relationship, but we both just gave up. Marcus felt a stab of pain at her words. Elena, you have to understand, no. Elena interrupted, her voice firm but not angry. Let me finish. I'm not here to relitigate the past or to make you feel guilty about choices you made. I'm here because I want to understand who you are now, not who you were when I was a child. The server arrived with fresh towels, which Elena accepted gratefully. As she dried her hair, Marcus found himself marveling at her maturity and self-possession. This was not the confrontation he might have expected from an estranged daughter. There was no screaming, no accusations, no demands for explanations. Instead, Elena seemed genuinely curious about him as a person, which was somehow more terrifying than anger would have been. Tell me about Cambodia, Marcus said, partly because he was genuinely interested and partly because he needed time to process everything that was happening. Elena's eyes lit up, and for the first time since she had arrived, Marcus saw her smile with genuine warmth. I worked with an organization that helps children who have been separated from their families, she said. We would try to reunite them with relatives, or if that wasn't possible, we'd help them build new support systems in their communities. The irony was not lost on Marcus. His daughter had spent her adult life reuniting broken families while their own family remained fractured. It must have been difficult work, Marcus said, and he could hear the genuine admiration in his own voice. How did you end up there? After Columbia, I was offered positions with several NGOs, Elena explained. I chose the one that would take me furthest from everything familiar. I think I was running away, to be honest. But what I found there was perspective. Elena paused to sip her tea, and Marcus waited, sensing that she was building towards something important. There was a little girl named Saphi, Elena continued. She was 7 years old when I met her, living in a refugee camp with her grandmother. Her parents had been killed in a bombing, and she hadn't spoken a word in over a year. My job was to help her process her trauma and begin to heal. Marcus found himself leaning forward, drawn into the story despite his own emotional turmoil. It took months of patient work, but eventually Saphi began to trust me, Elena said. And one day, she told me something that changed my entire perspective on forgiveness and family. She said that even though her parents were gone, she still talked to them every night before she went to sleep. She would tell them about her day, about the other children in the camp, about her fears and her hopes. And she said that as long as she kept talking to them, they weren't really gone. Elena met Marcus's eyes directly, and he saw tears there for the first time. I realized that I had been doing the opposite with you, she said softly. I had stopped talking to you, even in my own mind. I had decided you were gone, even though you were very much alive. And that silence was hurting me more than any of the mistakes you had made. Marcus felt his own eyes filling with tears, something that hadn't happened in more years than he could count. Elena, I'm so sorry. I know I failed you. I know I chose business over family, and I know there's no excuse for that. But I want you to know that not a day has gone by that I haven't thought about you, that I haven't regretted the way things ended between us. I know, Elena said, and her voice was gentle. Mom told me about the trust fund you set up for my education. She told me about the birthday cards you still send, even though I never respond to them. I know you cared, Dad. I think you just didn't know how to show it in a way that I could understand at the time. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the hotel's general manager, who approached their table with obvious concern. Mr. Chun, I'm sorry to intrude, but we've received several calls from guests complaining about noise from the lobby. Perhaps you and the guest would be more comfortable in your private suite. Marcus suddenly became aware of their surroundings again. Without realizing it, their conversation had been overheard by several late-night hotel guests and staff members. He could see people trying to listen discreetly while pretending to read newspapers or check their phones. The story of a hotel owner being confronted by his estranged daughter would be irresistible gossip for the tabloid press if word got out. Of course, Marcus said, standing quickly. Elena, would you like to continue this conversation upstairs? My apartment has a better view, and we'll have privacy. Elena hesitated, and Marcus could see her weighing her options. Coming to his hotel had taken enormous courage. Going to his private apartment was another level of trust entirely. I'd like that, she said finally. But I should probably call my hotel first and let them know where I am. I've been staying in a place downtown, but I can't remember the name off the top of my head. You're staying at another hotel? Marcus asked, and Elena caught the note of disappointment in his voice. I didn't want to assume I'd be welcome here, Elena said simply. For all I knew, you might have called security and had me escorted out. The fact that she had considered that possibility, that she had prepared herself for rejection, broke something inside Marcus's chest. You will always be welcome here, he said firmly. This is your father's hotel, which means it's your hotel too. As they rode the elevator to the top floor, Marcus found himself tongue-tied again. There were so many things he wanted to say, so many apologies he needed to make, but he didn't know where to begin. The elevator was silent, except for the soft hum of machinery and the sound of their breathing. Nice elevator music, Elena said suddenly, and Marcus looked at her in surprise before realizing she was making a joke. Despite everything, Despite the weight of their history and the magnitude of their reunion, she was trying to lighten the mood. "I'll have the music director fired immediately," Marcus replied, attempting to match her tone. Completely inappropriate selection for a father-daughter reunion. Elena laughed, and the sound was so unexpected and so welcome that Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. When was the last time he had heard his daughter laugh? When was the last time he had made her laugh? The memories were buried so deep under years of regret and avoidance that he couldn't access them. The elevator opened directly into Marcus's penthouse apartment, a sprawling space that occupied the entire top floor of the hotel. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Seattle's skyline and Elliott Bay, while carefully curated art and furniture created an atmosphere of refined elegance. It was beautiful, expensive, and utterly impersonal. Elena stepped into the apartment and turned slowly, taking in the space with the same analytical gaze she had used in the lobby. "It's very nice," she said politely. "Very clean. You can say it's cold," Marcus replied. "Everyone does. Sarah used to say, I had no idea how to make a space feel like home." "Mom never said that," Elena protested. "At least not to me. She didn't have to say it to you for it to be true," Marcus pointed out. "Would you like something to eat? I can have room service bring something up, or there's probably food in the kitchen." Elena shook her head. "I'm too nervous to eat right now," she admitted. "This is all a bit surreal, isn't it? 6 years of silence. And now here we are having tea in your penthouse like it's the most natural thing in the world." Marcus gestured toward the living area, and they settled onto opposite ends of a large sectional sofa. The distance between them felt both too far and too close at the same time. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said, her voice becoming more serious again. "Why did you stop fighting for me? After the divorce, after things got difficult between us, why did you just let me go?" It was the question Marcus had been dreading, the one he had no good answer for. How could he explain that he had been terrified of causing her more pain? How could he make her understand that he had convinced himself his absence was a gift rather than an abandonment? "I thought you were better off without me," Marcus said finally. "I saw how much happier you seemed with Tom, how much more stable your life was when I wasn't constantly disrupting it with my unpredictable schedule and emotional unavailability. I convinced myself that the best thing I could do for you was to step aside and let you have the family you deserved. But you didn't ask me what I wanted," Elena pointed out. "You made that decision for me. You were a child," Marcus protested. "How could I burden you with that kind of choice?" "By being honest with me," Elena replied. "By explaining your struggles instead of just disappearing. Do you know what message a child receives when their parent stops trying to see them? They think they're not worth fighting for." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, and he felt the air leave his lungs. "Elena, that's not. I never wanted you to feel that way. I was trying to protect you." "From what?" Elena asked. "From having a father who worked too much? From having to split time between 2 houses? Dad, lots of kids deal with divorce and complicated family situations. What they can't handle is feeling abandoned by someone who's supposed to love them unconditionally." Marcus buried his face in his hands, overwhelmed by the weight of his failures and the realization that his attempts to protect Elena had actually caused her the very pain he had hoped to prevent. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "God, Elena, I'm so sorry. I got everything wrong. I thought I was being noble, but I was just being a coward." Elena moved closer to him on the sofa, and Marcus felt her hand touch his shoulder gently. "Hey," she said softly. "Look at me." Marcus raised his head and saw that Elena's eyes were filled with compassion rather than anger. "I'm not telling you this to punish you," she said. "I'm telling you because I need you to understand how your choices affected me, so that we can move forward differently." "Move forward," Marcus repeated. "You want to move forward? After everything I've done?" "That's why I'm here," Elena said simply. "I didn't travel halfway around the world and spend 3 months tracking you down just to tell you what a terrible father you've been. I did it because I want to see if we can figure out how to be family again." The hope in her voice was almost too much for Marcus to bear. He had spent so many years believing that he had permanently destroyed any chance of a relationship with his daughter that the possibility of redemption seemed impossible. "I don't know how," he admitted. "I don't know how to be a father to an adult daughter. I missed so much of your life, Elena. I don't know who you are anymore." "Then, let's start there," Elena suggested. "Let's get to know each other as adults. No expectations, no pressure to fix everything overnight. Just two people trying to understand each other." As they talked through the night, Marcus began to see glimpses of the remarkable woman his daughter had become. Elena was thoughtful and articulate, with a dry sense of humor that reminded him of Sarah. She had inherited his determination, but tempered it with a compassion and emotional intelligence that he had never possessed. She spoke passionately about her work helping refugees, her plans to return to graduate school for a master's degree in international development, and her hopes of one day establishing her own nonprofit organization. Marcus found himself feeling proud and heartbroken in equal measure. Proud of the incredible person Elena had become despite his absence from her life, and heartbroken that he had missed witnessing her transformation from the awkward teenager he remembered into this confident, purposeful young woman. As dawn began to break over Seattle's skyline, Elena finally began to show signs of exhaustion. She had been traveling for over 30 hours to reach Seattle, and the emotional intensity of their reunion had taken its toll. "You should get some rest," Marcus said. "There's a guest room here, or I can have a suite prepared for you downstairs." "Actually," Elena said, stifling a yawn, "I think I'd like to stay here if that's okay. It feels like we're just getting started, and I don't want to lose momentum." Marcus felt a warmth spread through his chest that he hadn't experienced in years. His daughter wanted to stay. She wanted to continue their conversation, to continue the difficult but necessary work of rebuilding their relationship. "Of course," he said. "Stay as long as you like. We have a lot more talking to do." As Elena settled into the guest room, Marcus stood at his living room windows watching the sun rise over Elliott Bay. For the first time in decades, he wasn't thinking about business projections or expansion plans. Instead, he was thinking about second chances and the incredible gift his daughter had just offered him. He had no idea how to be the father Elena deserved, but he was finally ready to learn. Marcus woke to the sound of laughter drifting from his kitchen, a sound so foreign in his sterile apartment that he initially thought he was dreaming. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and he realized he had slept past noon for the first time in over a decade. The events of the previous night came flooding back, and he felt a mixture of joy and terror at the realization that his daughter was actually here in his home. He found Elena at the kitchen island, still wearing his spare bathrobe, sharing what appeared to be an animated conversation with Carmen, his longtime housekeeper. Carmen, a warm-hearted woman from El Salvador who had worked for Marcus for 8 years, was laughing at something Elena had said while preparing what looked like enough breakfast for a small army. "Buenos dias, Señor Chun," Carmen called out when she saw Marcus approaching. "Your daughter, she is delightful. She has been telling me about her work in Cambodia and about the children there. Such important work she does." Marcus felt a stab of guilt realizing that his housekeeper knew more about Elena's recent life after one morning than he had learned in the previous 6 years. But Elena's smile was warm and welcoming as she looked up at him. "Good morning, Dad," she said, and Marcus's heart skipped a beat at how naturally the word seemed to come to her. "I hope you don't mind that I raided your kitchen." Carmen found some fresh fruit and was kind enough to make coffee that actually tastes like coffee instead of the hotel lobby version. "Carmen makes the best coffee in Seattle," Marcus agreed, accepting a steaming mug from the housekeeper. "She's been trying to teach me her secret for years, but I think she enjoys keeping me dependent on her skills." Carmen laughed and swatted at Marcus with her dish towel. "Señor Chun, you are hopeless in the kitchen. Remember when you tried to make scrambled eggs and set off the smoke alarm 3 times? Elena giggled, and Marcus found himself smiling despite the embarrassment of having his culinary failures exposed. When was the last time he had engaged in playful banter with anyone? When was the last time his apartment had felt alive with conversation and laughter? "In my defense," Marcus said, settling onto a stool next to Elena, The instructions on the internet were clearly written by someone who assumed I knew what fold the eggs gently meant. They didn't specify how gently, and they certainly didn't mention that the heat should be lower than Inferno. "Oh no," Elena said, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Please tell me you didn't learn to cook from YouTube videos." Worse, Carmen interjected before Marcus could respond. He bought 7 different cookbooks and read them like business manuals. He made charts and timelines, but he still burned everything because he would get distracted by work calls in the middle of cooking. Elena looked at Marcus with amused disbelief. "You made charts for cooking?" Marcus felt his cheeks flush. "Cooking is just chemistry and timing," he said defensively. "I thought if I could understand the scientific principles, the practical application would follow naturally." "And how did that work out for you?" Elena asked, clearly enjoying his discomfort. "Let's just say that Carmen has job security for life," Marcus replied dryly. The easy camaraderie continued through breakfast, with Carmen regaling Elena with stories of Marcus's domestic mishaps, while Elena shared tales of learning to cook over open fires in rural Cambodia. Marcus found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't experienced in years, laughing at his own expense, and marveling at Elena's ability to find humor in even the most challenging situations. After Carmen left to attend to her other duties, Elena and Marcus settled back in the living room with fresh coffee. The morning levity had created a comfortable atmosphere, but Marcus could sense that Elena had more serious matters she wanted to discuss. "Can I ask you something that might be difficult?" Elena said, her tone becoming more serious. "Yesterday, you mentioned that you thought I was better off without you. But I need to understand what really happened during those last few years before we stopped seeing each other. Because the version I remember doesn't match the version you seem to believe." Marcus felt his defenses rising instinctively. He had spent years perfecting the narrative that cast his absence as a sacrifice for Elena's benefit, and he wasn't sure he was ready to examine the more complex and painful truth. "What do you mean?" he asked carefully. Elena set down her coffee cup and turned to face him directly. "I mean that you weren't just a workaholic father who missed school events," she said. "There were other things happening, things that I was too young to understand at the time, but that I've been thinking about a lot lately." Marcus felt a chill of apprehension. Such as the fact that you stopped coming to my birthday parties not because you were working, but because Tom would be there, and you couldn't handle seeing me happy with my stepfather," Elena said gently. "Such as the fact that you would promise to call on certain days, and then disappear for weeks without explanation, leaving me wondering if I had done something wrong." The accusations weren't delivered with anger, but their quiet accuracy made them even more devastating. Marcus realized that Elena had spent years analyzing their broken relationship with the same analytical skills she now applied to her humanitarian work. "Elena, you have to understand, I'm not done," Elena interrupted, her voice still gentle but firm. "I also remember the times when you would show up unexpectedly and want to take me somewhere expensive, like you were trying to compete with Tom and Mom rather than just spend time with me. And I remember how you would ask me questions about Tom's parenting style, like you were gathering intelligence rather than genuinely caring about my well-being." Marcus felt exposed and ashamed. Every observation Elena was making was accurate, and each one highlighted his failures as a father in ways he had spent years avoiding. "You're right," he admitted quietly. "I was jealous of Tom, and I was competing with him. I was also terrified that you would replace me entirely. So I tried to prove my worth by showering you with expensive gifts and experiences that I hoped would make me seem like the fun parent. But that's not what I needed from you," Elena said. "I needed consistency. I needed to know that you would be there when you said you would be there. I needed to feel like you actually wanted to spend time with me, not like you were fulfilling an obligation or trying to outdo my stepfather." Marcus buried his face in his hands, overwhelmed by the weight of his mistakes. "I know that now," he said. "But at the time, I was so consumed by my own insecurities and fears that I couldn't see what you needed. I was afraid of losing you, so I behaved in ways that guaranteed I would lose you." "What were you afraid of exactly?" Elena asked, because I've been trying to understand what drove you to push me away instead of fighting to keep me close. The question struck at the heart of everything Marcus had been avoiding for decades. He stood up abruptly and walked to the windows, staring out at the city below while he struggled to find the words for emotions he had never successfully articulated, even to himself. "I was afraid that I was inherently damaged as a father," Marcus said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "My own father worked constantly and died young, never having developed a real relationship with me. I grew up believing that men showed love through financial provision and professional success, not through emotional availability or presence." Elena joined him at the window, standing close enough that he could feel her warmth without touching him. "But you could have learned," she said softly. "Tom wasn't born knowing how to be a father either. He learned by spending time with me, by making mistakes, and figuring out how to do better. Tom didn't have a business empire to maintain." Marcus replied, then immediately regretted how defensive he sounded. "I'm sorry, that's not fair. The truth is that work was easier for me than fatherhood. I understood business. I could control outcomes through effort and strategy. But with you, I felt helpless and incompetent most of the time. So you chose the thing you were good at over the thing that mattered most," Elena observed without judgment. "Yes," Marcus admitted. "And by the time I realized what I had sacrificed, it felt too late to change course. You had a good life with your mother and Tom. You seemed happy and well-adjusted. I convinced myself that disrupting that stability would be selfish." Elena was quiet for several minutes, processing what Marcus had shared. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful rather than accusatory. "I think you're giving yourself too much credit for noble intentions," she said. "I think you were scared and overwhelmed, and instead of doing the hard work of learning how to be a better father, you took the path of least resistance and withdrew." The words stung because they were absolutely true. Marcus had taken the easy way out, disguising his cowardice as sacrifice and his emotional unavailability as pragmatism. "You're right," he said. "I was a coward. I'm a coward. I've spent my entire adult life running from anything that requires emotional vulnerability or the risk of failure." "Even now," Elena asked, "are you running from this conversation?" Marcus considered the question seriously. His instinct was to deflect, to steer the conversation towards safer topics, or to find a reason to return to work. But looking at Elena's face, seeing the genuine care and hope in her eyes, he realized that running away again would destroy any chance they had of rebuilding their relationship. "I want to run," he admitted. "Every instinct I have is telling me to change the subject or find an excuse to avoid this level of honesty. But I don't want to lose you again, Elena. If staying in this conversation is what it takes to have a relationship with you, then I'm going to stay, even if it's uncomfortable." Elena smiled, and Marcus saw a glimmer of the little girl he remembered, the one who used to beam with pride when he picked her up from school on the rare occasions when his schedule permitted. "That's a good start," she said. "But I need to tell you something else, something that might change how you think about our past." Marcus felt his anxiety spike again, but he forced himself to remain present. "Okay." Elena returned to the sofa and gestured for Marcus to join her. When he was seated, she took a deep breath and began speaking in the measured tone she used for difficult conversations. "When I was 18, just before I left for college, Mom told me something that she had kept secret for years," Elena said. "She told me about a conversation she had with you during the divorce proceedings, a conversation that I think you might have forgotten or blocked out." Marcus frowned, trying to access memories from that painful time period. The divorce had been a blur of legal meetings, financial negotiations, and emotional upheaval. He remembered very little of it clearly. "What conversation?" he asked. "According to Mom, you called her one night after a particularly contentious custody hearing," Elena continued. "You were drunk, which Mom said was unusual for you, and you were crying. You told her that you were terrified of damaging me the way you felt your own father had damaged you. You said you would rather disappear from my life entirely than risk turning me into someone who was afraid of emotional intimacy." Marcus felt the memory surfacing slowly, like something rising from the depths of a dark lake. He did remember that phone call, though he had buried it so deeply that he had convinced himself it never happened. You told Mom that you loved me so much that it physically hurt, Elena continued, but that you didn't know how to express that love in ways that wouldn't harm me. You said you felt like everything you touched turned cold and corporate, and you couldn't bear the thought of doing that to your own daughter. Marcus was silent, overwhelmed by the memory of that conversation and by Elena's knowledge of it. He had been at his lowest point, consumed by grief over his failing marriage and terror about his inadequacies as a father. The alcohol had stripped away his usual defenses, leaving him vulnerable and honest in a way that horrified him in retrospect. Mom never told me about that call until I was an adult because she didn't want me to feel responsible for your struggles, Elena said. But when she finally did tell me, it completely changed my understanding of why you withdrew from my life. It doesn't excuse my behavior, Marcus said quickly. Being afraid of failing doesn't justify actually failing. No, Elena agreed, but it explains it, and it tells me that your love for me was real, even if your expression of it was deeply flawed. Marcus felt tears threatening again, a sensation that was becoming uncomfortably familiar. I did love you, he whispered. I loved you so much that it scared me. I had never felt anything that powerful or that important, and I didn't trust myself not to destroy it. So you destroyed it preemptively, Elena observed sadly. You ended our relationship on your terms rather than risk having it end badly on its own. Yes, Marcus admitted, and I've regretted it every day since. Elena reached over and took his hand, the first physical contact they had shared since her arrival. Her touch was warm and steady, an anchor in the storm of emotions Marcus was experiencing. The reason I'm telling you this, Elena said, is because I want you to understand that I don't think you're a bad person or a hopeless father. I think you're someone who made terrible choices based on fear and insecurity, but who had good intentions buried under all the dysfunction. Marcus squeezed her hand, grateful for her compassion, but still struggling with the magnitude of his failures. What do we do with that understanding? He asked. How do we move forward knowing everything we know now? We start by accepting that the past can't be changed, Elena said. We can't go back and give me the father I needed when I was growing up, and we can't undo the years we lost. But we can decide who we want to be to each other going forward. What do you want from me? Marcus asked. What would a relationship between us look like now? Elena smiled, and Marcus saw both sadness and hope in her expression. I want to get to know you as you really are, not as the distant figure you became in my memories, she said. I want to understand your business, your passions, your fears, your dreams. I want you to know me as an adult, to understand the person I've become and the life I'm building. That sounds wonderful, Marcus said, but I'm not sure I know how to have that kind of relationship with anyone, let alone with my own daughter. Then, we'll learn together, Elena replied. We'll make mistakes and figure out how to do better. We'll have difficult conversations and hopefully some easy ones too. We'll see if we actually like each other as people, not just love each other as family. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. Marcus had spent so many years avoiding authentic relationships that the prospect of building one with Elena felt overwhelming. But the alternative was returning to the hollow existence he had been living, and he finally understood that no amount of professional success could fill the void left by his daughter's absence. I like that, he said, but you need to know that I'm going to need patience and probably a lot of guidance. I'm better at reading financial reports than reading people's emotions. Elena laughed, and the sound filled Marcus's apartment with warmth. Lucky for you. I spent 2 years learning how to work with people who don't speak the same emotional language, she said. I think I can handle one emotionally constipated hotel mogul. Emotionally constipated? Marcus repeated, feigning offense. I prefer emotionally efficient. We'll work on your vocabulary, too, Elena teased. And Marcus found himself laughing despite the weight of everything they had discussed. As the afternoon wore on, they continued talking, sharing stories, and memories that began to fill in the gaps left by their years of separation. Marcus learned about Elena's college experiences, her decision to work overseas, and her plans for the future. Elena learned about the challenges of building and maintaining a business empire, the loneliness of success achieved at the cost of personal relationships, and her father's genuine desire to contribute something meaningful to the world. By evening, both of them were emotionally exhausted but hopeful. They had not solved all their problems or erased all the pain of their past, but they had established a foundation for moving forward. For the first time in decades, Marcus felt like he had something more valuable than money in his bank account. He had his daughter's attention, her time, and, most importantly, her willingness to see if they could build something new together. As they ordered dinner from room service and settled in to watch the sunset over Elliott Bay, Marcus realized that this was what he had been searching for all his life without knowing it. Not the validation that came from financial success or public recognition, but the simple satisfaction of being known and accepted by someone who mattered more than any business deal ever could. He still didn't know how to be the father Elena deserved, but for the first time, he was ready to learn. 3 weeks had passed since Elena's unexpected arrival at the Grand Harbor Hotel, and Marcus's life had been transformed in ways he was still struggling to understand. His daughter had extended her stay in Seattle indefinitely, moving from the penthouse guest room to a suite on the 20th floor that she had insisted on paying for herself, despite Marcus's protest that she was family and therefore exempt from hotel charges. "I need some independence," Elena had explained when she made the move. "Living in your apartment felt too much like a regression to childhood. I want us to build an adult relationship, which means I need my own space." Marcus had been hurt by her decision initially, interpreting it as rejection, but he was learning to communicate his feelings rather than make assumptions. When he expressed his concerns to Elena, she had patiently explained that maintaining boundaries was healthy, not harmful. "It doesn't mean I don't want to spend time with you," she had assured him. "It means I want our time together to be intentional rather than obligatory." The distinction had been lost on Marcus at first, but he was beginning to understand the wisdom in Elena's approach. Their daily coffee meetings in his apartment had become something he looked forward to with an intensity that surprised him. Instead of the strained, formal conversations he remembered from her teenage years, they now engaged in lengthy discussions about everything from international politics to Elena's favorite books to Marcus's memories of building his first hotel. Elena had also insisted on learning about Marcus's business in detail, not out of interest in inheriting his empire, but because she wanted to understand the passion that had driven so many of his life choices. Marcus had been initially reluctant to involve her in Chun hospitality operations, fearing that she would judge his single-minded focus on expansion and profit. But Elena's questions were thoughtful and non-judgmental, coming from genuine curiosity rather than criticism. "Show me the numbers," Elena had said one morning, settling into Marcus's home office with a cup of Carmen's coffee. "I want to understand what you see when you look at a potential acquisition." Marcus had spent the morning walking Elena through financial projections, market analysis, and strategic planning documents. He watched her absorb information with the same analytical intensity he recognized in himself, asking penetrating questions about sustainability practices, employee welfare, and community impact that had never occurred to him to prioritize. "You're incredibly good at this," Elena had observed, studying a 5-year growth projection. "But I noticed that all your metrics focus on financial performance. What about social impact, environmental responsibility, employee satisfaction?" The questions had sparked a conversation that lasted well into the afternoon, with Elena challenging Marcus to consider aspects of business success that went beyond profit margins. She wasn't critical of his achievements, but she helped him see opportunities for improvement that aligned with values he hadn't realized he possessed. "I've never thought about business as a vehicle for social change," Marcus had admitted. "I've always seen it as a game to be won, with money as the primary scorecard." "It doesn't have to be either or," Elena had replied. "Some of the most successful companies in the world are the ones that balance profit with purpose. Maybe that's something Chun Hospitality could explore." The conversation had planted a seed that Marcus found himself returning to repeatedly. He began researching sustainable business practices employee-owned enterprises, and corporate social responsibility programs. For the first time in his career, he found himself asking not just whether a decision would generate profit, but whether it would create value for employees, communities, and the environment. Elena's influence was extending beyond business philosophy into more personal areas as well. She had gently but persistently encouraged Marcus to examine his relationships with his employees, many of whom had worked for him for years without receiving more than polite professional interaction. "Carmen has been taking care of you for 8 years," Elena had pointed out one morning. "What do you know about her family? Her dreams? Her challenges?" Marcus had realized with embarrassment that he knew almost nothing about Carmen beyond her exceptional housekeeping skills and her ability to make perfect coffee. Elena's observation prompted him to begin having real conversations with his longtime employees, and he discovered a wealth of interesting, complex people he had been treating as interchangeable service providers. Carmen, he learned, was supporting 3 children and 2 grandchildren on her salary, while taking online classes to become a certified translator. Patricia, his night manager, was a published poet who performed at local coffee shops on her nights off. David, his head of security, was a veteran who volunteered with homeless outreach programs and had insights about community service that Marcus found fascinating. How did I work with these people for years without knowing any of this? Marcus asked Elena after a particularly enlightening conversation with his restaurant manager about sustainable food sourcing. "Because you never asked," Elena replied matter-of-factly. "You saw them as functions rather than people. It's not unusual for executives, but it's something you can change if you want to." The changes in Marcus's perspective were becoming evident to his employees as well. Several longtime staff members had commented to Elena about the difference in his demeanor, his increased interest in their well-being, and his willingness to consider their suggestions for improving hotel operations. "Your father seems different," Patricia had told Elena during one of their chance encounters in the lobby. "More present, if that makes sense. Like he's actually seeing us instead of just looking through us." Elena had shared these observations with Marcus, who was both gratified and sobered by the feedback. He was beginning to understand how his emotional unavailability had affected not just his family relationships, but every interaction in his life. The most significant change, however, was in how Marcus was learning to communicate with Elena herself. Their conversations had evolved from careful politeness to genuine intimacy, with both of them sharing thoughts, fears, and dreams they had never expressed to anyone else. One evening, as they sat in Marcus's living room watching the city lights twinkle below, Elena had asked him about his own childhood, a topic he had always avoided discussing. "What was your father like?" she had asked. "I know he died when you were young, but I've never heard you talk about him as a person." Marcus had felt his usual impulse to deflect the question, but he forced himself to remain present and honest. "He was a hard man," he said finally. "Not cruel, but distant. He believed that showing affection would make me weak, so he expressed love through high expectations and relentless work." "Did you feel loved by him?" Elena asked gently. Marcus considered the question seriously. "I felt valued when I achieved things that made him proud," he said. "But I don't think I felt unconditionally loved, no. I always had the sense that his approval was conditional on my performance." "Is that why you struggled to show me love directly?" Elena asked. "Because you didn't have a model for unconditional parental affection?" "Probably," Marcus admitted. "I knew I loved you desperately, but I didn't know how to express it except through providing for you financially and trying to ensure your success. It never occurred to me that you might need emotional reassurance more than material security." "I needed both," Elena said simply. "But the emotional part was more important because it told me I was valuable to you as a person, not just as an extension of your legacy." These conversations were difficult, but healing for both of them. Marcus was learning to articulate emotions he had spent decades suppressing, while Elena was gaining insight into the generational patterns of emotional unavailability that had shaped her father's approach to relationships. They were also creating new memories together, experiences that had nothing to do with their painful past. Elena had insisted on exploring Seattle together, visiting places Marcus had lived near for 15 years, but never truly experienced. They spent an afternoon at Pike Place Market, where Elena delighted in the fish-throwing vendors and convinced Marcus to try foods he had never heard of. They took a ferry ride across Elliott Bay, with Elena pointing out architectural details of the city skyline that Marcus had never noticed despite seeing it from his penthouse windows every day. You live in one of the most beautiful cities in America, and you've been experiencing it from behind glass, Elena had observed as they stood on the ferry deck, wind whipping their hair and salt spray misting their faces. When was the last time you did something just for the joy of it? Marcus had to think hard before answering. I honestly can't remember, he said. Everything I do is either related to business or maintenance of some kind. Even my hobbies became tasks to be optimized rather than enjoyed. That's going to change, Elena had declared with the confidence of someone who had spent 2 years helping people rebuild their lives from scratch. You're going to learn how to have fun, even if I have to drag you kicking and screaming into enjoyment. The idea of Elena teaching him how to experience joy was both humorous and profound. His daughter, who had every reason to harbor resentment toward him, was instead investing her time and emotional energy in helping him become a more complete human being. The most surprising development was that other people were beginning to notice the changes in Marcus. His business associates commented on his increased interest in employee welfare and sustainable practices. His lawyer mentioned that Marcus seemed more relaxed and thoughtful in their meetings. Even his doctor, during a routine checkup, observed that Marcus's blood pressure had improved significantly. Whatever you're doing differently, keep it up, Dr. Rodriguez had said. You seem less stressed than I've seen you in years. Marcus knew exactly what he was doing differently. For the first time in his adult life, he was prioritizing relationship over achievement, connection over control. The shift was gradual and sometimes uncomfortable, but the results were undeniable. Elena had also begun sharing more details about her own life, including aspects of her personality and experiences that she had kept private during their initial reunion. Marcus learned that his daughter was funnier than he had realized, with a gift for observational humor that could reduce him to helpless laughter. She was also more vulnerable than her composed exterior suggested, struggling with questions about her career direction and her romantic life that she had never felt safe discussing with him before. I've been so focused on meaningful work that I've neglected other aspects of life, Elena confessed one evening. I'm 22 years old, and I've never had a relationship last longer than 6 months because I'm always leaving for the next assignment. That sounds familiar, Marcus replied dryly, and Elena laughed despite herself. I suppose I inherited more from you than just your stubbornness, she admitted. Mom always said I had your single-minded focus, but she hoped I would apply it more wisely than you did. Are you? Marcus asked. Applying it more wisely? Elena considered the question seriously. I think I'm trying to, she said. But I'm realizing that balance is harder than I expected. When you care deeply about your work, it's easy to let it consume everything else. The conversation had led to a discussion about Elena's future plans, including her desire to eventually establish her own nonprofit organization focused on family reunification services. Marcus had listened with growing excitement as she outlined her vision for an organization that would help separated families rebuild relationships damaged by trauma, displacement, or abandonment. It sounds like incredibly important work, Marcus had said. What would you need to make something like that happen? Elena had looked at him suspiciously. Why do you ask? Because I might be interested in being an investor, Marcus replied. Not as your father, trying to control your choices, but as a businessman who recognizes a valuable social enterprise when he hears one. The offer had sparked a lengthy discussion about boundaries, expectations, and the difference between support and interference. Elena was interested in Marcus's business expertise, but wary of becoming financially dependent on him in ways that might compromise her independence. I appreciate the offer, she had said carefully, but I need to know that your investment wouldn't come with strings attached. I don't want you using financial support as a way to influence my decisions or maintain control over my life. I understand, Marcus had replied, and I want you to know that my offer comes from respect for your vision, not from a desire to manage your career. If you're interested in exploring it, we can structure something that protects your autonomy while providing the resources you need. The conversation was still ongoing, with both of them taking time to consider the implications of mixing family and business relationships. But the fact that they were able to discuss such complex topics openly and honestly felt like a miracle to Marcus, who remembered their teenage years as a series of awkward silences and misunderstood intentions. Perhaps most importantly, Marcus was learning to be present in moments of simple connection. Instead of checking his phone during their conversations, he was giving Elena his full attention. Instead of scheduling their time together around business meetings, he was protecting their relationship time as sacred and non-negotiable. "You know what I appreciate most about these past few weeks?" Elena had said one morning as they shared breakfast on his apartment's terrace. "What's that?" Marcus had asked. "You haven't once made me feel like I'm competing with your work for your attention," Elena replied. "When we're together, you're actually here. That's something I never experienced as a child." The observation filled Marcus with both sadness for the father he had been and hope for the father he was becoming. He was finally learning what Sarah had tried to teach him years ago, that presence was more valuable than presence, that attention was more precious than financial provision. As they finished breakfast and prepared for another day of exploring Seattle together, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed in such a short time. 3 weeks ago, he had been a successful but isolated man whose greatest achievements felt hollow. Now, he was a father actively working to rebuild a relationship with his daughter, a boss learning to see his employees as whole people, and a human being discovering that vulnerability could lead to connection rather than weakness. The work was far from finished. There were still difficult conversations ahead, more trust to be built, and patterns of behavior that would take time to change. But for the first time in decades, Marcus felt like he was moving in the right direction, towards something more meaningful than financial success or professional recognition. He was moving toward authentic relationship, and his daughter was helping him find the way. 6 months after Elena's dramatic arrival at the Grand Harbor Hotel, Marcus stood before a packed conference room filled with executives, board members, and senior staff from all 12 of his hotel properties. The quarterly meeting that had once been a routine presentation of financial metrics had been transformed into something unprecedented in the company's history, a comprehensive announcement of Chun Hospitality's new direction toward sustainable, socially responsible business practices. Elena sat in the back row, having insisted she didn't want to be seen as influencing the proceedings despite her significant role in inspiring the changes Marcus was about to announce. She wore a professional navy suit that Sarah had helped her choose for the occasion, and Marcus could see both nervousness and pride in her expression as he prepared to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice carrying the authority that had made him successful, but tempered with a warmth that was entirely new. "Today marks not just another quarterly review, but a fundamental shift in how Chun Hospitality defines success." He clicked to his first slide, which displayed the company's traditional metrics alongside new categories that measured employee satisfaction, environmental impact, and community engagement. The room buzzed with quiet conversation as executives processed the unexpected data. "For 15 years, we have measured our success primarily through occupancy rates, revenue per available room, and profit margins," Marcus continued. "These remain important indicators, but they tell only part of our story. Today, I want to share our expanded vision of what it means to be a successful hospitality company in the 21st century." Marcus had spent months preparing this presentation with Elena's guidance, researching best practices from companies that had successfully integrated social responsibility with profitability. The transformation hadn't been easy or cheap, but the initial results were encouraging. "I'm pleased to announce that Chun Hospitality will be implementing a comprehensive employee ownership program across all properties," Marcus said, advancing to a slide that outlined profit-sharing plans and stock option programs. "Our people are the foundation of our success, and they deserve to share in the prosperity they help create." The announcement generated visible excitement among the hotel managers and department heads in the audience. Carmen, whom Marcus had invited to attend the meeting as his special guest, was wiping away tears as she processed the implications of what she was hearing. Additionally, we are committing to carbon neutrality across all properties within 3 years, Marcus continued, through a combination of renewable energy adoption, waste reduction programs, and partnership with local environmental organizations. The environmental initiatives had been Elena's particular passion, and she had spent weeks researching sustainable hospitality practices that could be implemented without compromising guest experience. Her background in international development had given her insights into resource management that proved invaluable in designing practical, effective programs. Finally, Marcus said, advancing to his most personally significant slide, Chun Hospitality is proud to announce the creation of the Elena Chun Foundation for Family Services, which will focus on providing resources for family reunification and relationship rebuilding services worldwide. The audience turned to look at Elena, who blushed deeply but maintained her composure as applause filled the room. Marcus had surprised her with the foundation announcement just minutes before the meeting began, presenting it as a birthday gift 6 months early. The foundation will operate independently from Chun Hospitality's business operations, Marcus explained, but it represents our company's commitment to strengthening the human connections that make communities thrive. After the meeting concluded and the executives had returned to their respective properties with new directives and unprecedented enthusiasm, Marcus and Elena found themselves alone in the conference room. Elena was staring at the foundation slides with an expression that cycled between disbelief, gratitude, and concern. A foundation, she said finally. You created an entire foundation. We created a foundation, Marcus corrected. I provided the initial funding, but the vision and mission are entirely yours. You'll have complete autonomy over its operations, and the board of directors will be selected by you, not me. Elena turned to face him directly, her eyes bright with unshed tears. This is too much, she said. I can't accept something this significant. Yes, you can, Marcus replied gently, because it's not really a gift for you. It's an investment in the work you're already doing and a way for me to contribute to something meaningful instead of just accumulating more assets. Elena sat down heavily in one of the conference room chairs, clearly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Marcus was proposing. Do you realize what you're suggesting? She asked. This would be a multi-million-dollar commitment. It would require staff, offices, programs, oversight. I realize exactly what I'm suggesting, Marcus interrupted. And I've never been more certain of any business decision I've ever made. Elena, I've watched you work with individual families over the past 6 months, helping them navigate difficult conversations and rebuild damaged relationships. You have a gift for this work, and the world needs what you have to offer. Through their time together, Elena had continued her consulting work with families in crisis, using video calls to maintain her international client base while establishing connections with local social service organizations in Seattle. Marcus had observed her sessions from a respectful distance, marveling at her patience, wisdom, and ability to help people find common ground even in the most contentious situations. One of the families I worked with last month told me something that I can't stop thinking about, Elena had shared with Marcus recently. The father said that learning to communicate with his estranged son was the hardest thing he'd ever done, but also the most important. He said that business success felt meaningless when his personal relationships were broken. The comment had resonated deeply with Marcus, who recognized his own journey in the father's words. It had also crystallized his understanding of why Elena's work was so valuable, not just to individual families, but to society as a whole. The foundation would allow you to help hundreds of families instead of dozens, Marcus continued. You could develop training programs for other counselors, create resources for families navigating separation and reunification, and establish services that don't currently exist. Elena was quiet for several minutes, her analytical mind processing the possibilities and challenges of running a major foundation. Marcus waited patiently, having learned over the past months that his daughter's decision-making process required time and space. "I want to start small," Elena said finally. "Maybe pilot programs in 3 cities with careful measurement of outcomes and impact. I wouldn't want to scale quickly just because the funding is available." "That sounds like exactly the right approach," Marcus agreed. "Sustainable growth based on demonstrated effectiveness. And I would want complete independence over hiring and program development," Elena continued. "No interference from you, even if you disagree with my choices." "Agreed," Marcus said without hesitation. "Though I hope you'd be open to advice when you ask for it." Elena smiled, and Marcus saw the excitement beginning to overcome her initial shock and concern. "I suppose I could occasionally consult with someone who has experience building organizations from the ground up," she said teasingly. The foundation announcement was just one of several major changes that had transformed both Marcus's business and personal life over the past 6 months. His relationship with Elena had evolved from tentative reconnection to genuine friendship, with both of them finding joy in activities as simple as cooking dinner together or as complex as analyzing the ethical implications of various business decisions. Elena had also developed relationships with other members of Marcus's extended professional family, becoming particularly close to Carmen and Patricia. The 3 women had formed an unlikely but strong bond, with Carmen teaching Elena family recipes from El Salvador, while Patricia introduced her to Seattle's literary community. "It's like having a sister I never expected," Elena had told Marcus after attending one of Patricia's poetry readings. "I spent so many years feeling like I didn't have any family beyond Mom and Tom, but now I realize family can be created as well as inherited." Sarah had visited Seattle twice during the 6 months, initially with some apprehension about Elena's decision to rebuild a relationship with Marcus. But seeing the positive changes in both her daughter and her ex-husband had gradually shifted her concern to cautious optimism. "I never thought I'd say this," Sarah had told Marcus during her most recent visit, "but you seem happier than I've seen you since before Elena was born. More like the man I married, before business consumed everything else." The observation had been both gratifying and sobering for Marcus, who was still processing the extent to which his single-minded focus on success had damaged his relationships and his own well-being. He was learning to forgive himself for past mistakes while remaining committed to making different choices going forward. Tom had also been part of the reconciliation process, joining the family for dinner during Sarah's visits and offering his own perspective on the challenges of blended family relationships. His presence had been initially awkward for Marcus, but Elena had insisted that any rebuilt relationship with her would need to include acceptance of Tom's important role in her life. "Tom was there for me when you weren't," Elena had explained gently but firmly. "That doesn't diminish your role as my biological father, but it does mean that he's family too. If you want to be part of my life, you need to find a way to coexist with him." Marcus had been surprised to discover that Tom was an intelligent, thoughtful man whose love for Elena was genuine and selfless. Their conversations had been stilted at first, but they had gradually found common ground in their shared concern for Elena's well-being and their mutual respect for her independence. "She's remarkable," Tom had said to Marcus during one of their dinners together. "Sarah did an incredible job raising her, but Elena's strength and compassion are distinctly her own. You should be very proud of the woman she's become." "I am," Marcus had replied, "and I'm grateful that she had you as a stabilizing influence during the years when I was too self-absorbed to be the father she needed." The conversation had been one of many steps in Marcus's ongoing journey toward accepting responsibility for his past choices while building healthier relationships in the present. Perhaps the most significant change was in how Marcus had begun to view his own legacy. Instead of measuring his worth through accumulated wealth and business achievements, he was learning to find satisfaction in the positive impact he could have on other people's lives. "I used to think legacy was about building something that would outlast me," Marcus had told Elena recently. "But I'm beginning to understand that the most meaningful legacy is the positive influence you have on the people around you while you're still alive to see it. Elena had been accepted to graduate school at the University of Washington for the following fall, where she planned to complete a master's degree in social work while simultaneously launching the foundation's pilot programs. The arrangement would keep her in Seattle for at least 2 years, giving her and Marcus additional time to continue strengthening their relationship. "Are you sure you don't mind me staying in Seattle?" Elena had asked when she received her acceptance letter. "I know you're probably used to having your space back by now. I can honestly say that the past 6 months have been the best of my adult life," Marcus had replied. "Having you nearby has been the greatest gift I could have asked for." The statement was true in ways that surprised Marcus himself. He had discovered that he genuinely enjoyed Elena's company, not just because she was his daughter, but because she was an interesting, thoughtful person whose perspective on the world challenged and enriched his own understanding. Their weekly dinners had become a cherished tradition, with Elena cooking meals inspired by her travels while Marcus shared stories from his childhood and early business years that he had never told anyone else. They had also developed a shared love of hiking, exploring the trails around Seattle on weekends while discussing everything from international politics to family history to their hopes for the future. "You know what I've realized?" Elena had said during one of their recent hikes, as they stood on a ridge overlooking Mount Rainier. "I spent so many years angry about the father you weren't that I never gave myself the chance to appreciate the father you are." "What do you mean?" Marcus had asked. "I mean that you're incredibly generous, deeply principled, and more emotionally intelligent than you give yourself credit for," Elena had replied. "Yes, you struggled with work-life balance and emotional availability when I was growing up. But you're also someone who has worked tirelessly to provide opportunities for other people, who has built something meaningful from nothing, and who has been willing to completely change your life when you realized your priorities were wrong." The conversation had continued as they made their way back down the mountain, with Elena helping Marcus recognize positive qualities in himself that he had never acknowledged. It was part of the ongoing process of healing that characterized their rebuilt relationship, not just addressing past hurts, but actively creating new patterns of communication and connection. As autumn settled over Seattle and Elena prepared to begin graduate school, Marcus found himself reflecting on the extraordinary year that had changed his life so completely. 12 months ago, he had been a successful but isolated man whose greatest achievements felt empty. Now, he was a father actively engaged in his daughter's life, a business owner committed to social responsibility, and a person who had learned that vulnerability could be a source of strength rather than weakness. The journey was far from over. There were still difficult conversations ahead, more trust to be built, and patterns of behavior that would require ongoing attention. But Marcus was no longer afraid of the work required to maintain meaningful relationships, because he had experienced the profound satisfaction that came from authentic connection. Standing in his penthouse apartment one evening, watching Elena and Carmen cook dinner together while Patricia read poetry aloud from the living room, Marcus felt a contentment that no business achievement had ever provided. His home was filled with laughter and conversation. His work was guided by values that extended beyond profit, and his relationship with his daughter was built on mutual respect and genuine affection. The girl who had walked into his hotel lobby 6 months ago with the simple word "Dad" had given him the greatest gift of his life, a second chance to be the father and man he had always had the potential to become. And Marcus was determined to spend the rest of his life proving worthy of that extraordinary grace. The future stretched ahead of them, full of possibilities neither of them had imagined when Elena first summoned the courage to seek out the father who had disappeared from her life. But they would face that future together, as families should, with love that had been tested by separation and made stronger through the choice to reconnect. In the end, the most successful acquisition Marcus had ever made was not a hotel or a business deal, but the relationship with his daughter that he had almost lost forever. It was a success measured not in dollars or market share, but in shared laughter, honest conversations, and the simple miracle of being known and loved for exactly who he was. And that Marcus had finally learned was the only success that truly mattered.